Hey, this is D.S. Yaxheimer, and this is another edition of The Spectre, and this is my Paranormal Activity episode. It's the Halloween season is upon us, and I've been meaning to make this video the past week, but I've been sick, as you can tell by my voice. Horrible, cold, flu-ish, whatever. So I guess late September is considered well into the beginning of the Halloween season these days. So, the Paranormal Activity movies are kind of controversial when it comes to horror movies. The first one created quite a bit of buzz through the audience reaction commercials, that's sort of what got us. I mean, me and my fiance saw it. We saw it at home the first time, actually. We didn't see it in theaters. But the first film, which featured a couple living together in a house, and they are experiencing some paranormal, activity. And so the boyfriend, played by Mika Sloat, and they have that's their names, that's the name of their characters in the movie. They're just sort of playing themselves in a way. And his girlfriend Katie, living girlfriend Katie, I think it was Featherstone. She, as it turns out, is, if you've seen the whole trilogy, is a descendant of a coven of witches, and they promised the first male, I think the first male boy born into her side of the family, to the demon Toby. I'm pretty sure I have it straight. I've watched these movies, most of them, more than once. I only saw Ghost Dimension one time, and that's pretty much like, to just talk about the movies as a whole, the trilogy, it probably should have ended with 3. 3's kind of my favorite one. The one that took place is sort of a prequel in the 80s, when Katie and her sister were growing up. And it sort of just, I think it had the most effective ending, I thought, as far as those movies went. But in the first film, of course, what happens is Katie slowly becomes possessed by this, as her sort of idiot boyfriend, who is somehow a day trader and can afford a nice house in San Diego like that, doesn't listen to her and keeps videotaping, or not videotaping, well, yeah, recording the activities going on in the house and antagonizing the demon, and bringing a Ouija board into the house. And there's a clairvoyant, or a guy who, he's not a demonologist, but he was supposedly trying to help them, and then he says, no, I gotta get out of the house, I can't even be in here, I'm pissing off the poltergeist or whatever it is. So he leaves, and that's part of, the acting isn't great. I know it's supposed to be a found footage movie, and the first movie looks most like a found footage movie. And if you've seen the first movie, you know what happens. Katie obviously succumbs, and just starts acting weirder and weirder. And this, of course, spoilers. There will be spoilers in this video if you haven't seen these films. And kills Mika, and at the end, and just you sort of see her face come up to the camera, and it sort of becomes demonic and all that, right at the very end. And and the second one is tied into the first one. It's kind of takes place a little bit before the first movie, and at the end, it basically leads up to Katie pulling up in the driveway in the beginning of the first movie, and she's basically bringing the entity into their home from her sister's home. She was at her sister's house, and they were having her sister was possessed by by something, the demon, and was had a young kid, had a baby at the time. And that was the baby that they had to give up to, I guess, the demon Toby and all of that. So they manage to exorcise the demon. This I'm just doing very short little synopsises of each movie. I'm not really going to go into detail. You can watch them if you want to further analyze them. But she goes and gets her their Mexican housekeeper, because all these wealthy upper middle class people have Mexican housekeepers, helped them, who they kicked out earlier because she was like smudging the house by burning sage or whatever, to get rid of the entity. And then so they open, now we gotta have you back, get, call Consuela, get her back. So they, or Rosita or whatever her name was. So they get her back, and they get the demon is out, but Katie comes back anyway, because it's just after she kills Mika, she comes back to her sister's house and kills everybody except the one stepdaughter, who discovers everybody dead. And so she takes the baby. You see Katie walk off with the baby, and that's the last time you see Katie, until part 4. But part 3, you see Katie as a kid, basically, and there's a little bit of a grown-up adult Katie in the beginning, because they always find videotapes or something. It's kind of how it starts. And part 3 is basically Katie's mom is dating or is engaged to like a wedding videographer, and it's in 1988, so he has like a big kind of commercial grade camera, and it turns out stuff starts happening in that house. It's pretty crazy. I mean, there's more special effects as the movies go on. I mean, part 2 didn't really have too many visual effects. It was, there's some, and so part 3 has a little bit more of that, a little bit more like there's a girl, I think the girl's being held up by her hair in the one room, and there's just more visual effects, but it still resembles the found footage movie. It looks like 1980s videotape. So they go through all that thing, and it turns out the grandmother, and you can kind of tell in the beginning she's a little witchy, and turns out like basically when they leave the house, Katie's mom's house, they go to the grandmother's house, and it's kind of scary in that part. I mean, it's effective. I think the movies give you so little in terms of scares throughout them, that when there is something, there's like, usually at the end, that's when you're, it gives you some scares, I guess. I would say it's a little startling. I don't know. A lot of people don't like it because it doesn't tell, it doesn't really feed you the story like a typical conventional movie, whether it's a horror movie or any movie. It just doesn't really, the shots aren't framed in the way, scenes aren't framed in the way a regular movie, you know what I mean? If you're watching a horror movie like Halloween, the characters are having a conversation, it's framed, it's a set-up shot, it's lit differently, it's lit well. This is meant to look at just snippets and clips and things like that, and it jumps around more, so you're kind of like, you have to pay attention, and then kind of, put the movie together sometimes after it's over, if it's really, really jumpy. I mean, I had the same issues with the original Blair Witch, which I do like, and so part 3 ends, and I thought that had the most effective ending, and then you go on to part 4, and it's like, okay, this is, they didn't need to make this movie, but Katie had to come back, and the baby, Katie's nephew, it's some years later, he's like 5 or 6 or maybe 8. I don't know how old he is. He's maybe 7. The baby Hunter was adopted out, and I forget what his adopted name was, to this family, which is again kind of like another kind of Caucasian, kind of middle, comfortable, upper class. I don't want to use that term, but you know what I mean. And they're out in Colorado, I believe. So there's this daughter and the adoptive younger brother, and these parents, these clueless suburban parents, and Katie moves in across the street, long story short. and there's this nice house across the street, and somehow some woman who's been on the run with a kid, whose whole sister and her brother-in-law were murdered, missing baby, and she just goes to Colorado, and no one's looking. It's just kind of strange, but anyway, she's a witch, and she's magical, and she can just like hide and buy like probably $1 million houses. So she probably has like the Coven Mafia. They have all their money because there's all these witches there too. And so in part 4, Katie gets Hunter. So that's kind of set up in part 4, and I'm not going to go into it. There's a girl, there's a guy, kind of boyfriend, young teen boyfriend, and they set up cameras everywhere. They set up cameras on the laptop. Most of that movie is told through like her doing her video blog in her laptop, and it gets boring. It just drags out, and then she's running around with the laptop or the camera or the phone or whatever she has, and it just seems if you're running from a ghost or something, you're not worried about like, oh, we got to make sure we take the camera along because I'm running for my life and I'm scared. It got dragged out too much, because it's one thing if a camera's set up and things are happening, but if you're running for your life and you're scared, you're not worried about dragging a camera along with you. It's hard to run holding a laptop anyway, or a fairly large tablet, and make sure you're recording all this shit. We're gonna record this, they're gonna kill me, And anyway, and I don't know, why did Katie and the witches leave all this footage behind? Why didn't they erase all the, erase the hard drives of all the video? So, and then part 5 was called The Marked Ones, and it involved another group of people. I think it was in Los Angeles, and they were living in an apartment complex, and some kid bought a camera, and I'm not sure how the demon got in this. I haven't seen The Marked Ones in a while. I probably should have watched it before I made this video, but there's more visual effects in the 5th one, and it moves a lot faster, and that there's more action, and it's a lot of people didn't like it. Really, after I think the 3rd one, I don't think a lot of critics and people dug these movies, because it was like, that seemed like a good way to end it, and they didn't, because there was more money to be made, because these movies are relatively cheap to make, and they usually make considerable amount of money when they're released. So in part 5, this one young man, I think he's like lives in like an Hispanic neighborhood, and most of the characters, not that it matters, but it just happens to be that they are, and I don't want to be, so they're living in an apartment. The one kid buys a video camera at a pawn shop or something, and then they start, I guess, recording eventually. Like, the one kid gets powers, he's sort of, and I think he gets very, kind of possessed by that, because it's more like he's one of the X-Men or something, or one of those movies where somebody gets, crazy, extra normal, whatever you want to call them, powers, and he's just the dogs on the ceiling barking, and there was just all kinds of shit, and they went through one door at one point in the movie and wound up in Mika and Katie's house, and you see her, I think, kill Mika at the end, and it just sort of goes back to that, and I think they wind up in the house from part 3 too in that movie. They're running around there, and they're sort of cross their, it's a little trippy. I actually thought that was kind of cool. They, did that, so it just sort of, brings the movies together, and it's just sort of, I didn't really expect it. So it wasn't too bad. As far as like a cohesive plot, overall with this entire trilogy, it doesn't always quite come together. So after part 5, part 6, which didn't need to be made, was called The Ghost Dimension, which is about, they find a house is built upon the site of the house that burned down, because Katie's and her sister's home burned down, which they see in the 3rd movie. And in the 3rd movie, there's the old camera from the 80s. And so the house burned down, a new house was built on that site, and this camera is found somewhere with videotapes and everything. And from what I recall from watching it, and I probably saw this a year and a half ago, and I could have watched it on Hulu before I made this video, but I do remember basically, and it's way more visual and it moves quite a bit faster as the movie goes along. There's just, you know, super big effects. It's not like the other movies, the first movie, where it's just a door moving slightly or some, you know, noises and keys getting knocked off the counter. This is like, you know, crazy, you know, like it looked like Poltergeist. So there's this couple and they have a little girl, and she, I think, is in touch with Toby, the demon, and it really doesn't have much to do with the characters from the other movie, other than that they're in the house or live on the site of the house where Katie grew up, and her sister. So they have this somewhere they find this camera, I forget where, but they find it, and he opens up the side of it, and the components inside and all of that are sort of glowing, and they look kind of crazy, you know. It doesn't, you know, and it doesn't, I guess it's just to denote that the camera is somehow magical, or it's a conduit through it. The spirit realm can come through it, and when he takes video with it, it usually there's like ghosts and other, it's just things that he can see when he shoots with it. And the kid gets basically possessed, and the family is trying to fight this. This is around Christmas time, I think the movie takes place. There's like a Christmas tree in there, and it's a big, again, it's like a big fancy house, and you know, I guess rich white people are just fucking stupid. They don't know when to get out of their house. So anyway, they pretty much fail to get the I think they get an exorcist to exorcise the demon out of their daughter. It doesn't really work, and I mean, because Toby, and for some reason Toby's there, and he's gonna take this kid with her to the ghost dimension. So they fail. The family fails miserably in this case. They just can't do anything. They don't know what they're doing. They can't. It's just too powerful. I guess the entity became stronger. The demon Toby became stronger, and activating the camera, I guess, released the demon. I might be wrong if that's exactly the plot mechanism, but I believe that's what it was from back then. And it's not a bad movie to watch. It's not like the first one where you really have to wait for something to happen, because the first one's a lot of conversation. It's and it's a lot of, you know, that kind of thing. I mean, you have to really sort of adapt to it to watch the first movie, because it's very minimalist. And the sixth movie, The Ghost Dimension, is just basically a straight up paranormal horror movie for the most part. It doesn't even seem like a found footage film, even though it's what it's supposed to be. And the kid at the end, you just see basically, at one point she goes through like a portal tunnel thing in her bedroom, and you see it in the movie poster, and I think you do see, like, I think scenes of Katie and I think the apartment, or not the apartment, Mika and Katie's place. I think they go through that. I think they might even go through the old house, where the house was on the original site that house was built on, from the third movie. And I think they kind of, it's like a retrospective at that point. You just see sort of snippets of that, if I remember correctly, and then at the end you just see basically the young girl and these two legs of an adult, which is the demon Toby, I guess, and they take off, and the parents are killed, of course, horribly killed, and that's it. That's kind of the end of that. And critics, I'm pretty sure, hated it. I remember that it wasn't well liked. I think people were totally sick of Paranormal Activity. It was just so, it just became, I think the movies just became obviously derivative. I think found footage movies just get that way. I mean, the Blair Witch basically, I mean, these movies are inspired by the Blair Witch because it's that kind of flick. I mean, the Blair Witch was very minimalistic and very gritty, and it looks like it could be real. And like the Blair Witch, the actors from Paranormal Activity, I think Mika Sloat and Katie Featherston, if I pronounce her name correctly, they don't really work anymore. They've been in a few other things, but I've seen her in another, like, it was another kind of B-horror movie, but she doesn't have like a thriving acting career, because they were just, because they use unknown actors to make these movies, and that's, that's kind of unfortunate, because your career doesn't usually take off making these movies, even though they become big hits and people still watch them years later. I mean, the Blair Witch is still a pretty big, still a very sought after horror movie, and it gets rediscovered all the time. And I think the same thing happened with the actors from Paranormal Activity, because they're just not known people, and they're not really that great actors, great performers either. But that's my assessment of Paranormal Activity. If you have any comments, leave them below. This has been another edition of The Spectre, and have a happy Halloween if I don't make another video by then. Later.